Welcome, Sens Talk.
Russell winds in, feeds it back across the strike and scores! Brady Tkachuk makes it 2-0. Claude Giroux, hit alone, scores!
Tim Stützle across, Tkachuk score! The captain, Brady Tkachuk, buries it with 1:18 to go.
See you later. Go, Sens, go. Welcome to Sens Talk. My name is Brandon Plant, and I am your host for a random Monday, middle of July. The Ottawa Senators and the Belleville Senators, for that matter, have made some splashes today. They extended one of their goaltenders, who is an RFA, and as well traded away one of their top prospects. So with that, let's jump right into the news with the first piece of business. As Mads Søgaard, friend of the show, the Great Dane, extends with the Sens organization for the next 2 years. Now, this is a very interesting deal because not only is it a 2-year deal, but the deal, for the first year is a two-way deal, so there'll be no issue with him coming up between Belleville and Ottawa, the NHL and AHL. But the second year of this contract is a one-way contract. So what does that mean? We'll talk about that in a second, but this is what Mads Søgaard is going to be making: $775,000 in the NHL and $225,000 in the AHL. It's a bit of a high AAV for the AHL, so if he is sent down through waivers in a couple years of that second year of that contract, maybe, just maybe, that high AAV for the cap in the AHL, that high salary, persuades teams to potentially not pick him up. Of course, that's me just probably overthinking things, but he also kind of just deserves a raise. He's been pretty solid in Belleville, but also in Ottawa, he's been pretty decent, I suppose. Obviously, he was thrust into a really, really terrible situation a couple of years ago. Talbot got hurt, Forsberg got hurt, everyone got hurt, so Mads Søgaard had to carry the way. He's played in 27 career NHL games, posting a 3.44 goals against average and an 884 save percentage with a 10-10-3 record. Considering the defense he had in front of him, and considering the fact that a lot of those games were games in which the Sens were not only out of the playoffs, but were addressing a very injury-depleted lineup, not too bad whatsoever, especially when you compare that to his AHL stats, which are far better, of course. In 32 AHL starts last year alone, he recorded a 2.45 goals against average with a 916 save percentage, with an 18-9-3 overall record. In 6 playoff games last year as well with the Belleville Senators, he put up a 2.46 goals against average and a 910 save percentage. So a very solid season last year for Mads Søgaard. Keep in mind, a lot of young goaltenders, even in the AHL, struggle and put up roughly 900 or so save percentage. So he put up way above average in that regard. And once again, most of his NHL experience came, as I already mentioned, during those let's say down years, right? So for Mads Søgaard, this is a guy who, has had a very solid AHL career, 50, 33, and 6 in 96 career AHL games with a total goals against average of 2.80 and an overall save percentage of 908. So very solid. This is a guy that likely will be splitting duties with Levi Merlainen next year in Belleville. But in 2 years from now, Anton Forsberg has only 1 year left on his contract, which expires at the end of this season. So assuming everything works out and not the worst case scenario plays out where Linus Ullmark does extend with the Ottawa Senators, that means Forsberg obviously will be, leaving. The writing is clearly on the wall that if Ullmark extends and Forsberg's contract is done, he will be gone and Søgaard will be called up to be the permanent backup, which I think is a smart move. This is a very cheap contract if that is the case in 2 years or even next year. Who knows what happens. But I think, once again, this gives him a bit more time to develop. But at his age, especially considering the amount of time he's been in the AHL, it's now or never, right? And he knows that, everyone knows that, and I'm very confident that he will continue to put up solid AHL numbers and get more opportunities in the NHL, and eventually next year, probably will get a few games, but in a couple of years, I think he'll be ready to be at least a backup, especially if Linus Ullmark's the starter. I'm not too worried about that situation, or that tandem, I should say, whatsoever. So welcome back to Ottawa. Mads Søgaard, the Great Dane, a friend of the show. It's always great to see a friend of the show get a contract, no matter where it is, but especially if it's back here in Ottawa. So that's a nice little piece of business there for the Sens and the Belleville Senators. And speaking of the Belleville Senators, they made a move today as the Ottawa Senators, or the Belleville Senators, is basically Belleville, but I guess you can say it's Ottawa. Ottawa made a deal with the Edmonton Oilers as they traded Roby Jarventie and a 2025 4th-round selection to the Edmonton Oilers for Xavier Bourgault and Jake Chiasson. So firstly, Jake Chiasson immediately had to check if that is the, son or a brother or somehow connected to Sens legend Alex Chiasson. But unfortunately, he is not. So that kind of sucks. But, let's just talk about Roby Jarventie first. Especially if you're an Edmonton fan watching this, you're probably wondering what you're getting in, frankly, a very skilled prospect. So Roby Jarventie, he's a young player. He's also 21 like Bourgault and Chiasson. He was a winger originally, but did turn into a center during his time in the Sens organization. He's played in 136 AHL games with 83 points in those 136 AHL games, with 38 of those points being goals. Now, the real issue with Roby Jarventie is he can never stay healthy. He just can never stay healthy. He put up very, very solid numbers when healthy with Belleville. He had 30 points a couple years ago and 20 points in 22 games last year. So, he's a solid player, but considering his injury past and the last couple years have been full of injuries where he's missed, frankly, last year alone, the entire season basically, and then the year prior, a good portion of it, the injury concerns are something you definitely have to keep in mind if you're an Edmonton fan or the Edmonton Oilers organization. That being said, if he can stay healthy, I still see Roby Jarventie as an NHL guy, maybe a middle six winger. I don't see him as the center of the NHL. I don't think he's strong enough, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And I've seen a lot of his games. I watch Belleville a lot. I think this is a solid player, but I do see him shifting back to the wing in Edmonton, especially for a team like Edmonton, who likely is looking for, in the next year or two, or even next year, a guy that can step in, be a power play guy with a good shot, and can hold his own. He can do that, but, he would have to be in a middle six role. The issue with Roby Jarventie and why he was dealt is there's no spot for him in Ottawa in the future. He's not a top six guy here compared to Shane Pinto, Josh Norris, Tim Stützle, Drake Batherson, or, of course, Brady Tkachuk, and, as of right now, Claude Giroux as well. So there's no spot for him in that regard. Of course, really, Greg would also be on top of him in the depth chart, so he's not likely going to be in that middle six position too, especially with David Perron and Amadio signed for a couple of years at the minimum, so he's not a fourth liner either. So the writing was on the wall. I don't know if he requested a trade. That hasn't been said. I don't think he has. Wouldn't shock me, though, because the writing's been on the wall for this guy between the injury history and the lack of NHL time. Only 7 NHL games since getting drafted, with 1 assist in those 7 games. This is a guy with a lot of potential, and if he can stay healthy, I think will be a solid second, third line scoring winger for the Edmonton Oilers down the line. Definitely a power play specialist. And I mean, again, who knows? Maybe this is a guy that can go next to Connor McDavid and go off. Again, this is a trade where Ottawa gets Bourgault, which we'll talk about in a second. A guy similar to Jarventie, just a prospect who was drafted a few years ago and hasn't worked out so far. So maybe a change of scenery is what it takes. So, best of luck to Roby Jarventie in Edmonton. I've always liked the player. I didn't really like him turn into a center. I think he's more better as a winger. I think Edmonton's getting a pretty decent player here. And again, it's not a highly dangerous trade for both sides. So best case, it works out. You get a cheap, middle six guy. Worst case, it's a wash, and you just tried to do something and it didn't work out, which happens quite often in the National Hockey League. Now, the last thing I'll say about Roby Jarventie is this. Look, I don't hate the player. I think he's going to be a solid player, as I've already mentioned. He's still only 21, has a lot of development to go through, and Edmonton, they need scoring wingers, of course, in that middle six, bottom six kind of position, so there's definitely a possibility for him to work out there in Edmonton in the near future. But I always think back to this. At 34th overall in that draft, the Buffalo Sabres took J.J. Peterka, a German winger and friend of Tim Stützle, a former teammate of his. Now, I don't understand why you skipped over J.J. Peterka, who is a scoring winger that the Ottawa Senators desperately needed at the time, and still frankly do. Now, I don't mind, taking Roby Jarventie. If he's your guy, take a swing on a scoring guy like Jarventie as well. But Peterka, was supposed to go in the first round. Jarventie was supposed to be a late second-round pick. So, again, not Jarventie's fault he was drafted where he was. But for a team like the Ottawa Senators that always try to go after, or especially at the time anyways, go after former, teammates, former sons of NHLers, or even best friends, Norris and Tkachuk, for example, it's kind of shocking that they didn't go that route. But once again, that is something you can just look back on. It's hindsight's 20/20, so to speak, right? But at the same time, myself and many of you, I'm sure included, at the time were questioning the move. So unfortunately, it didn't work out here in Ottawa, and I wish him nothing but the best in Edmonton. And remember, as we transition now over to what Ottawa got in this trade, keep in mind, Steve Staios used to be in Edmonton, right, as an advisor, so he saw these players a lot, so maybe he knows something we don't. Now look, in terms of what Ottawa got, Xavier Bourgault is kind of similar to Roby Jarventie. He was the 22nd overall pick in the 2021 NHL draft. So this is another player who's young, he's 21 years old as well, who just hasn't figured it out so far. But he's actually been pretty decent in the AHL, similar to Roby Jarventie. So it's basically a swap between the two. In 55 games in the AHL, Bourgault scored 8 goals and 12 assists for 20 points total. In 117 career AHL games, keep in mind, of course, that 20 points was just last year in those 55 games. In 117 career AHL games, he's compiled 21 goals and 33 assists for a total of 54 points in 117 games. So pretty similar numbers to Roby Jarventie, give or take 30 or so points and 30 or so games. So, once again, basically a swap between the two. Bourgault is a 21-year-old center as well, who's 6 foot tall. So essentially the same thing as Roby Jarventie, who is also a center and is like 6'2". So, I mean, it's basically a wash in that regard. Now, Sportsnet put out a Edmonton prospect preview a year ago, and kind of just taking a look at the prospect pool there and what they got. And Jason Bakula of Sportsnet wrote this about Bourgault last year. Bourgault is a quick stick, makes plays in small areas, and has shown more willingness to engage along the boards and battle for pucks. But he isn't a physical forward. He uses his instincts to anticipate and win pucks off opponents. He has improved mightily defensively, and he's never below the play in the offensive zone when his team has possession. Clearly a smart kid with good hockey IQ who knows how to be in the right place at the right time. So again, you never really know what you're getting in these type of trades where you're giving two former top picks a change of scenery. But for Ottawa, Belleville's a star-studded team right now. They have some really, really good AHL talent down there, even some future NHL talent down there as well. So Bourgault can come to a really solid and deep forward core and hopefully flourish. And now for the other piece in this trade for Ottawa, Jake Chiasson. He's 6'2". He's a right winger and center who's also 21 years old. Smart kid who's known for deceptive shots according to elite prospects. He also played with the Brandon Wheat Kings of the WHL, which of course, as a Brandon, I love it. I loved when Mark Stone was a Brandon Wheat King, and I love that Jake Chiasson was a Brandon Wheat King, so hopefully that gives him a bit of good luck. But he was also a pretty decent player there in the WHL. He averaged basically a point every second game or so in the WHL, and he's also a former 4th-round pick. He made his pro debut last year in the ECHL, playing in 68 games, compiling 9 goals and 11 assists for 20 total points. Ironically, the exact same stat line as Bourgault in the AHL last year. Chiasson as well played in one AHL game last year as well. No points in that one game. So again, look, Ottawa gets 2 young players here, and they give up a 4th-round pick in 2025 and Roby Jarventie to get it. So it's basically a wash. There's no winner in this trade except for the players who get a change of scenery and an opportunity to kind of start fresh and have a new chance to impress a new team, new organization, new management, with new line mates. Hopefully that can get the job done for both of these guys. That being, of course, Bourgault and Jarventie. And you never know with Chiasson as well. 4th-round pick, so we'll see what happens with him. Definitely going to need a lot more, AHL time. But again, still young, so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, again, this is just a wash. Change of scenery move. I think Bourgault is somebody that could turn into something. Once again, Jason Bakula of Sportsnet just last year in March said that he projects to be a top 6 forward in the NHL. So again, you never know. He definitely will take a few years to develop, but again, Steve Staios used to be in Edmonton. He clearly likes the guy, and he got his guy. So welcome to Ottawa, Xavier, and of course Jake Chiasson, and best of luck in Edmonton to Roby Jarventie. In terms of what to expect from Bourgault and Chiasson, he needs a lot more development. I don't really know what to expect from him. As of right now, I'd say he's likely an AHLer for life who may get some time in the NHL in spurts. But for, Xavier Bourgault, Bourgault is a guy that potentially could be a 3rd, 2nd-line guy. We just really have to see how he meshes here in the Sens organization. But yeah, with that, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you like this move? Do you not like the move? And more so, what do you think about, Mads Søgaard extending for 2 years as well? And what do you think that means for Linus Ullmark and Anton Forsberg? Besides that, thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next one. Go Sens, go.